Thank you very much for offering this opportunity to be able to talk to you people. And it's nice to go ahead and have this conversation, which, you know, happens very rarely, except for then at an art hop, then we have a lot of people that want to ask questions. Today, we still get people, after all this time, they say, oh, I didn't know you guys were down here, you know, and so it's kind of best kept secret, you know, it's been for a long time. And so, but anyway, then we believe that then that because of our presence then and actually convincing other people that were on the other end of town to come over here and create kind of a large group of art-related galleries and studios and whatever. So that's been very, very successful for us. And you know, when the Metropolitan Museum shut down, the activity on that end of town pretty much slowed and came to a stop. And so now all the activity is located in this particular area.
Let's take a look at some of your art.
Sure, absolutely.
Let's start with this one.
Yeah. I have some pieces up here on the wall that were put up because I chose them at random, because then when my daughter and Tim then opened up the studio next door, they just picked out pieces that I had not seen probably in the last 20 years. And I thought, well, okay, I'll just go ahead and, you know, they pick through and find some things and so on. So then there were pieces that started then from the late 90s and then progressed on then to some work that was done probably in 2019. I grew up in a household where my father did much of the flower arranging, and so that was always, I was very, very conscious of that growing up and so on. But as an Asian American painter, then I think to myself, you know, as we go through and develop, you know, how do you identify yourself from all the people that are making work today? And I thought, well, you know, since I have this kind of background about then my Asian culture and so on, why don't I go ahead and just maybe give tribute then to him and my family? So then I had chosen then, you know, just kind of at random, you know, different kinds of flowers and so on. This happens to be an iris. And so I thought, well, how do you represent flowers other than the traditional way that people do that? And I said, I want to go ahead and scale everything down and then change it so that then basically that the flower shape itself, because as people walk in, they can recognize that is a flower shape. It may not give them all the information that they want, but it gives a hint of that. So then as a result, then I thought, well, how else can I include other items? You know, do I put a background in or whatever? And I says, no, I've been a proponent of painting that growing up in the 60s and 70s and so on, in which then painting in America had changed so much. And the fact that then there was the idea of illusion was almost absent, and that the surface of the painting became the most important thing, that the painting has a height and a width, and everything else on that is compressed, and there's this kind of textural and limited scale, but as well as the idea then of some kind of inclusion of depth and so on. So everything became very, very flat. And so this item here, where we have this little kind of bowl, this aqua-colored bowl and so on, I used to go over to the west side and we would have lunch there or dinner. And so after dinner, they would then present us with a little bowl with almond cookies in it. And I said, oh, that's kind of nice. And so I took a photo of it. That then became an inclusion in this particular painting. So, you know, inspiration comes from very different places and so on. And I think it's being conscious at the moment where you see something, and you have to decide then whether that becomes part of your own, you know, development and information for paintings and so on.
So on this next one, we don't have any imagery.
No, as it's changed now, so then this is a painting that came probably, oh, I can't remember if there's a day on the painting or not. Yeah, this is 01. And so then, again, making sure that then that I still honor then those things that were done in that were of the 60s that I have been such a tremendous influence for me. And so then I started just doing paintings, and in this case here, because I wanted to approach it differently. You know, normally what people would do is they would start with a white canvas, and I said, well, I'm going to reverse that. And so then I would stretch the canvases and I would put them on the floor and wash them with the black paint. And so starting out with a black surface presents some problems. But then at the same time, knowing that I would be at the studio on a daily basis, and every day as I apply a coating or whatever that I do, eventually it obscures and covers up then the black that was present and so on. So as you can see, the black is kind of peeping through in different places and so on. So then again, compressing then the surface, so that the surface about then is what you see here. It's not intentionally meant to go ahead and give some kind of objectified illusion, but it's just paint applied onto a two-dimensional surface.
And how long did you work in this style?
I've used it, but it's changed over a period of time, and so on. And so then there's been the inclusion of other kind of imagery that I have found that would be workable, and so on.
On this one, how many layers of paint does it take to cover up that black?
Yes, as you can see, the black is still showing through, and that's the advantage then. And this is something that I was very interesting. That I was a student of Darwin Musselman, who was a professor at the college and so on. And so we always talked about then the fact that we always put a color surface on the canvas before you started, and so on. So then, over a period of time, you get to understand that, and then you just adopt that, and it becomes then a part of what you do.
I think it's very interesting in this other part of the painting where you can actually see your actions by the paint strokes. And then that becomes, for me, a very important part of
that is, and that's a thing that has followed me over a period of time, that I believe that then everything that you see shows a history of the painting. Mm-hmm. That this was the beginning, this was the next layer, and so on and so forth. And I believe that's absolutely crucial, and especially in paintings of this sort. Now, if I were a traditional painter, I would probably paint it so it's almost mistake-free. And there's that tendency then for traditional painters to do that. Well, I am not of that period and that kind of painting. I'm more of an abstractionist and so on, and in which then the gestured quality of paint application becomes absolutely crucial. Again, an extension then, as you can still see the black seeping through. But as you see the difference between that painting and this one here, because all of a sudden it's become very lightened because of the color that I've used. But at the same time that I said, well, what can I use on this surface? And so again, in reading in Japanese haiku poetry and things of that nature and so on, I started thinking about then certain words that I was very, as I was growing up as a child. My mother and father spoke Japanese to us, but we answered back in English and so on. But anyway, so then there were things that I remembered. And so then the idea then of using a kind of thunder or tornado or large wind shape and so on. And so then as a result, then I thought, well, how can I use this kind of natural element in the world today and use it in a way where it becomes subject matter, and also then changing then the application. So I'm trying to, as I work and develop and so on, I want to change so the application is appropriate then to what I want to do. This orange here is shellac. And shellac is a process that woodworkers use to coat their furniture and so on. But I felt that it had a quality about it that was very transparent, and it showed then the early markings that I had made on the canvas, so that there was, again, by looking at the work, you start to look at things that you don't quite understand, and all of a sudden you realize that then with extended viewing, you get more of a sense about then what the painting is about and what I went through to do it.
So this black stripe up here and the orange one
yes,
down here,
yes.
does that Is it counterbalance?
Yes, absolutely is. That's a good question. Yes, and again, I think, as I was schooled at the college and so on, there were certain things that we talked about, geometric forms and the implied. If you have a line that's vertical, it's implied as a tree form or whatever. If it's a horizontal, it's going to be of the landscape and so on. And I said, well, because this is a very gestured application, and I wanted something then to be just the opposite of that. And so by then very carefully then taping and painting this very, geometric shape that has, you think about it, has probably no relevance to what I'm doing. But at the time that I'm doing this, and so I said, of course, that's what it needs. It needs a break, a visual break from then the obvious things that you see applied here and so on. And so all the drips and things and so on, are the evidence of what has taken place, what the paint was like and so on, that, these are things that happen, and I'm not going to come back and repaint them out. Because what you're doing is then, defeating then the whole idea of history in painting itself. So, okay.
And the thought that occurred to me is that it's the only straight line, and it's the only kind of human artifact.
Oh, sure.
In the painting,
Absolutely.
Everything else is either nature, so it's very striking, and sort of serves as this really strong contrast.
Right. And I have to then, as the painter then, as the designer of this work and so on, I said, well, how much of this can I use? What should be its length? What should be its width? Again, what I do is I just take pieces of colored paper and I would just put them up to see how it would appear and so on, instead of actually just doing something. So I found that this starts to work for me. And so the idea of doing this right on the edge, which causes the viewer to extend his vision out to the edges of the painting.
Also makes the viewer uneasy sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. That's right. And I think that's wonderful, because I've had people come in to Art Up and so on, and they'll, rarely do they ask questions, but I try to offer some, information about what I do and so on. And then eventually people will start to ask questions and so on. He says, and then I've had people say, well, Robert, he says, there's something I like about your painting, but I don't fully understand it. I said, that's where I want you to be. Now we can have a discussion. This painting has come much later, and there probably were a few paintings in between, because when I work in series, that's what I usually do, and sometimes the series will last for maybe 10 paintings, sometimes maybe half a dozen paintings, and of course then that series I took to San Francisco ended up to be 26 paintings, and they were of various sizes and so on, because it was, again, for some reason, very, very approachable and very popular and so on. But I've continued then to do that every so often, and this was a show that I had in 2019. And again, I thought, well, I'd come back to this whole idea of, again, colorless work and so on. So all you get is black and white. And so you reduce then everything about painting is today. And so the idea that it's void of color, but other than black and white. So I'm limited then how I can go ahead and approach then imagery using black and white. So then this is an obvious example of a flower that we have in my garden at the house and so on. And I use it in a way where it's basically kind of a silhouette. I have people at Art Hub who come through and they'll walk around the building on the inside, and they'll look around and they'll walk out, because they have this perception about what art is to them. And again, if I can put up work and maybe a person would then engage me in asking, how did you do this, or what is this about, and so on, I have an obligation then, it may be from all the years that I've taught and so on, to be able to go ahead and explain then what drives me in my painting and so on. Because I think it's more than, you don't normally get that when you're walking into a studio or a gallery and so on. People walk in and view the work for what it is and then walk out. So. And so we can walk over here, and I will just show you a few things that are the most current pieces and so on, and reasons why they are, again, very, very different from what you had seen before. During the pandemic shutdown and so on, I was down here very seldomly and so on, maybe once a week or so on, where normally I'm here 6 days a week. And so I said, and again, I said, well, what do I do now? What can I do and so on? So then I said, well, I think, again, I've always believed that in order to regenerate my enthusiasm for painting, that I try to change things up a little bit, so I'm having to be confronted then with a new surface, a new something, whatever it may be, that's different from what I'm normally used to doing. Some of the earliest painting, especially in the haiku group that I had done, I had often put down kind of commentary as I'm painting, and I thought, well, why not do this? And yet it becomes then more descriptive maybe of what the painting is about, and I've often left it, and so I made no real, again, reference then to trying to mark it out and so on. So I said, well, if I continue then to think about haiku and continue to use it as text in the work and so on, I'm going to change up the text of the application and the method, and I'm going to not use my handwriting, but now I'm going to take a traditional rubber stamp process, which I think is, for paintings, I'm not quite sure that's something that we normally would do and so on. So I found someone who could make some rubber stamps for me, and I would take them poem and divide it up so that then each stamp had a few words that were very descriptive. In this case here, suddenly thinking of it. And so, okay, is it about a spring evening? I went out and was sweeping the garden, and so I've repeated those rubber stamp applications to a point then where I also wanted to make things, again, a little more complicated and so on, and obscuring a little bit by then creating this overlapping, which creates a very dense appearance of what I'm doing. And visually, it creates more interest in the surface itself, because there's enough information that's been applied to figure it out. And I like the idea then that the viewer, and I was telling Joyce, they can read a passage like this. Hopefully then, they're going to say, well, gee, what's the rest of it say? What is the rest of it about? And so with haiku poetry, and its limited use of words and so on, with additional viewing, you start to figure out, oh, that's what the poem is, And so I've always, again, liked that idea that I'm trying to give them some hint, engage them, and yet at the same time offer them a way to go ahead and understand what I've been doing. So then the idea that to use text as information, as material, why shouldn't we? I mean, we use anything else. I mean, all the things that we used in modern and contemporary painting and so on. And as we look at contemporary painting today, I mean, it's just whatever people use, it's at hand, and so on. But I felt that this was still related then to what I had been doing over the years, but now I've changed it up.
So do you sell most of your paintings out of your studio, or do you sell them from galleries?
Fresno is a hard sell for me, very hard sell.
Too bad.
And it was a result early on when I hooked up then with the artist gallery, and then I asked the artist gallery, I said, would you mind if I use then the format for your rental agreements and so on? They said, sure, you're far enough away from the Bay Area, yeah, we'll go ahead and do that. So they allowed me to do that. So then during Art Up, you see people coming in and looking at the painting, and I know that these are, because they're larger format paintings and so on, people do not see that in their homes and so on. So then I would have, if they've shown any kind of interest, I says, I have a rental program and so on. So what's that about? I said, well, it's a 6-month program and so on, in which it costs you then X number of dollars. In fact, it's probably going to be less than your PG&E bill that you have and so on. But this will be for a 6-month period. And then we will go to your house, we would hang the painting up and so on, and in 6 months' time, we'll come back and then pick up the painting and so on. Or you can go ahead and extend then the rental period, so they would have it for the next 6 months and so on. So there are some people then, once they've gotten used to having scaled paintings in their homes, they say, wow, it really presents a statement in the home itself. It no longer becomes this kind of accessory that you have in the hallway or whatever, but it does have a presence and so on. So then, yeah, so that was, so they worked, out very well, and there were people now that have these paintings in their home and so on.